In all my years of conquest, violence, slaughter, it was never personal. But I'll tell you now, what I'm about to do to your stubborn, annoying little planet. I'm gonna enjoy it. Very, very much.
Every hero needs a villain, but why do we find villains so fascinating? We all grew up believing that heroes are meant to be admired and villains are meant to be feared. But think about it, why do so many people love villains? Why does Heath Ledger's Joker in The Dark Knight remain one of the most quoted characters in cinema history? Why do fans dress up as Darth Vader, Loki, or even Hannibal Lecter? Is it because villains are cool? Or is it because deep down, we relate to them more than we'd like to admit?
You have nothing to threaten me with. Nothing to do with all your strength.
There's something raw and unfiltered about villains. They don't play by the rules. They say what they feel. They do what they want. And in a world where we are constantly told to behave, to fit in, and to follow the rules, villains are a fantasy of what it would be like to break free. Psychologist Carl Jung believed that every person has a shadow self, the darker, hidden side of our personality that we suppress. It's the part of us that feels anger, jealousy, selfishness, and even cruelty. We like to think we're nothing like villains, but the truth is, villains embody the thoughts and impulses we all have but rarely act on. Take Walter White from Breaking Bad, a high school chemistry teacher turned ruthless drug kingpin. He starts off as an ordinary man, but his descent into villainy is driven by something deeply human: pride, ambition, and the fear of being powerless.
I liked it. I was good at it. I was alive.
Is that evil, or is it just human? Not all villains are the same. Some are tragic figures shaped by pain, Magneto, Darth Vader. Some believe they're doing the right thing, Thanos, Ozymandias. Others simply want chaos for chaos's sake, the Joker, Tyler Durden. But what all villains share is a psychological depth that makes them more than just the bad guy. They force us to confront questions that heroes never do. What would you do if the world was against you? How far would you go to achieve power? What if morality was just a matter of perspective? This is what we're going to explore today. The psychology of villains, from the tragic to the terrifying, the manipulative to the misunderstood. By the end of this video, you might realize,
Wake up to reality. Nothing ever goes as planned in this accursed world. The longer you live, the more you will realize that the only things that truly exist in this reality are merely pain, suffering, and futility.
not all villains are born evil. Some are made, and sometimes the world gives them no choice. Villains don't always start off as monsters. Some of the most complex and heartbreaking villains in fiction began as victims of circumstance, shaped by tragedy, betrayal, and suffering. What if, in another life, they could have been heroes?
You thought we could be decent men in an indecent time! You were wrong. The world is cruel.
The tragic villain, the ones who were pushed into darkness rather than choosing it. These are the villains we empathize with because their pain feels real. They are reminders that sometimes evil is not a choice, it's an inevitability. We start with a villain whose story is almost impossible not to sympathize with, Erich Landseer, better known as Magneto. As a child, Erich was forced into a Nazi concentration camp where he watched his mother murdered before his eyes. The same hands that held her as she took her last breath became the hands that bent steel gates in anger. This is where Magneto's story intersects with Erik Erikson's theory of psychosocial development. Erikson argued that childhood experiences shape how we see the world. For Erich, the world was cruel, divided, and unjust. As a result, he became the very thing he hated most, a man willing to use force to prevent what happened to him from happening again. His ideology? Mutants are the next oppressed race, and history has taught him that the only way to survive oppression is to strike first.
I will bring you hope, old friend. And I ask only one thing in return. Don't get in my way.
Yeah, we are the future, Charles, not them. They no longer matter. Magneto's tragedy isn't that he's wrong, it's that he's not entirely wrong. The world has shown him that humans fear and destroy what they don't understand. And while Professor X fights for peace, Magneto knows that peace is rarely granted to the oppressed. It's something you take. Wouldn't you feel the same way if you had lived his life? If Magneto was shaped by the cruelty of the world, Anakin Skywalker was shaped by something even more personal. Fear. Anakin was the chosen one, destined to bring balance to the Force. He was strong, powerful, and admired. But underneath it all, he was afraid.
You're fulfilling your destiny, Anakin. Learn to use the dark side of the Force.
Anakin's descent into villainy is a textbook case of attachment theory, a concept developed by John Bowlby. People with secure attachment feel safe in their relationships, but those with insecure attachment, often due to trauma or loss, become obsessive, anxious, and afraid of abandonment. For Anakin, losing his mother to slavery and violence created a deep wound of helplessness. He vowed never to be powerless again, and when he had visions of his wife, Padme, dying, his fear consumed him. What did Emperor Palpatine do? He exploited that fear. He knew that if you take someone's greatest love, make them believe they'll lose it, they will do anything to keep it. Even commit genocide.
From my point of view, the Jedi are evil!
Anakin Skywalker didn't become Darth Vader because he hated the Jedi. He became Darth Vader because he loved too much. And his tragedy is that in trying to save the one he loved, he became the reason she died. Imagine being told your entire purpose was to be a hero, only to wake up one day and realize you're the villain.
You either die a hero, or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain.
Harvey Dent had everything. He was Gotham's White Knight, the man who was supposed to clean up the crime-ridden city. He was incorruptible, a symbol of hope, until he lost the one thing he couldn't live without, Rachel Dawes. Harvey's fall from grace is a study in moral injury, the deep psychological damage that happens when someone is betrayed by the system they believed in. He trusted Gotham's justice system, and it failed. He believed in fairness, but fairness didn't save Rachel. He thought morality was black and white, but life showed him it was nothing but chaos and chance. And so, he became Two-Face, the living embodiment of the random cruelty of the universe. He no longer made choices based on ethics, but on a coin flip, because to him, that was the only real justice left.
It's not about what I want. It's about what's fair!
Two-Face isn't terrifying because he's evil. He's terrifying because he proves that anyone, even the most moral among us, can break under the right circumstances. Would you stay good if the world took everything from you? Or would you too flip a coin?
All those years wasted fighting each other, Charles.
These are the villains we mourn because they remind us of ourselves. They weren't born with evil in their hearts. They weren't scheming for world domination. They were people. People who suffered, who lost, who were betrayed. And that's the scary part. Because if they could become villains, what's stopping you? The ideological villain. The ones who think they're right. Every villain sees themselves as the hero of their own story. But what if they actually are? Some of the most terrifying villains in fiction aren't driven by greed, revenge, or chaos. They aren't monsters born from trauma. Instead, they are something far more unsettling. They are believers. They aren't destroying the world for power. They're saving it, at least in their own minds. These are the ideological villains. Villains who act out of conviction, logic, and righteousness. They are the ultimate manifestation of the philosophical question. Do the ends justify the means? Let's take a deep dive into these villains and uncover what makes them so compelling and so dangerously relatable.
The hardest choices require the strongest wills.
Thanos isn't your typical power-hungry warlord. He doesn't desire wealth or domination. He wants to save the universe from itself. His logic? The universe is overpopulated and resources are finite. His solution? Eliminate half of all life to restore balance. Thanos' ideology is rooted in Malthusian theory, an 18th century concept proposed by Thomas Malthus, which warns that unchecked population growth leads to famine, war, and extinction. Thanos sees himself as the only one with the will to do what others won't. Make the hard choice. But this belief is also a form of utilitarianism, a philosophy championed by Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill. Utilitarianism argues that the best action is the one that maximizes overall happiness. If sacrificing half the population means saving the other half, then isn't that the greater good? This is what makes Thanos so terrifying. He's not wrong about the problem. He's just horrifically misguided in his solution. And the worst part? He never questions himself. His ideology blinds him to the pain he causes.
This day extracts a heavy toll.
The scariest villains are the ones who believe they're doing what's right, because conviction is more powerful than greed.
So in order to save this planet, I had to trick it with the greatest practical joke in human history.
Killing millions.
To save billions.
I did the right thing, didn't I? It all worked out in the end. Unlike Thanos, Adrian Veidt, aka Ozymandias, doesn't rely on brute force. He's the smartest man in the world, and his villainy is one of intellect and pragmatism. When faced with the reality that the US and Soviet Union are on the brink of nuclear war, he devises an unthinkable plan: stage an alien attack that unites humanity against a common enemy. The catch? He has to kill millions of innocent people to make it happen. Ozymandias embodies consequentialism, the idea that morality is determined by outcomes, not intentions. If killing millions prevents the extinction of billions, isn't it worth it? The trolley problem is a famous ethical thought experiment that asks, if you could pull a lever to divert a train to kill one person instead of 5, would you do it? Ozymandias pulls the lever without hesitation. And here's the scariest part. It works. The world unites. Nuclear war is averted. His plan succeeds, but does that make it right?
Never compromise. Not even in the face of Armageddon.
Ozymandias is terrifying because he represents what happens when morality becomes math. And the biggest question his character raises is this: would you have done the same? The best character fits in the ideological villain is Light Yagami, the boy who became a god.
I am Kira. I'm not only Kira, but I am also God of the New World. Kira has become law in the world we now live. He's the one who's maintaining order. I have become justice. The only hope for mankind. Kill me? Is that really the right thing to do? Since Kira's appearance 6 years ago, wars have stopped, and global crime rates have been reduced by over 70%. But it's not enough. This world is still rotten.
Few villains embody ideological fanaticism, like Light Yagami from Death Note. Given a supernatural notebook that allows him to kill anyone just by writing their name, he doesn't use it for revenge or money. He uses it to cleanse the world of criminals. Light's transformation from a brilliant but ordinary student to a power-drunk god is a case study in moral absolutism. He truly believes that his definition of justice is the only one that matters. At first, his logic seems understandable. Who wouldn't want to rid the world of criminals? What if we could eliminate all evil people? But as the series progresses, Light begins killing anyone who opposes him, including innocent investigators trying to stop him. His justification? They're obstacles to justice. This is where Light shifts from righteousness to dictatorship. His ideology isn't about justice anymore, it's about control. Light is a terrifying warning about what happens when people believe their morality is infallible. Because history has shown that the worst atrocities aren't committed by those who think they're evil. They're committed by those who think they're righteous. What makes ideological villains so terrifying is that they aren't motivated by greed or sadism. They are driven by belief. And belief is the most powerful force in human history. Their stories force us to ask uncomfortable questions. Is morality objective or subjective? Do the ends justify the means? If you had the power to make the world better, would you use it? But perhaps the most disturbing question of all is this: if you had been in their place, Would you have done anything differently?
Some men aren't looking for anything logical, like money. They can't be bought, bullied, reasoned, or negotiated with. Some men just want to watch the world burn.
Most villains have a plan. They have an ideology. They have a purpose. But then, there are those who don't seek power or revenge. They don't want to rule the world. They just want to watch it burn. Unlike other villains who believe they are right, these villains don't care about being right. They aren't driven by logic or ideology. They are the living embodiment of anarchy, destruction, and unpredictability. These are the villains that make us uneasy because they defy reason, and reason is what keeps us comfortable. Let's take a look at the chaotic villain and why they are some of the most dangerous and fascinating characters in fiction.
Introduce a little anarchy. Upset the established order, and everything becomes chaos.
Introduce a little anarchy, upset the established order, and everything becomes chaos. I'm an agent of chaos. The Joker is the perfect chaotic villain. He doesn't want money. He doesn't want power. He just wants to create mayhem. And the scariest part? He believes in it. The Joker embodies nihilism, the philosophy that life has no inherent meaning, and that morality is just an illusion. He believes that people cling to rules because they are afraid to admit the truth, that everything is random and nothing matters. In The Dark Knight, his entire goal is to prove that under the right circumstances, even the best people can become monsters. That all it takes is one bad day for someone to lose their morality. He gives Gotham a choice: blow up another ferry full of innocent people, or be blown up themselves. The choice forces them to confront their own nature. Are they really as civilized as they claim to be? The Joker is terrifying because he doesn't want anything rational. You can't bargain with him. You can't predict him. And that makes him the ultimate agent of chaos.
It's only after we've lost everything that we're free to do anything.
At first glance, Tyler Durden seems like a revolutionary. He speaks about the emptiness of consumer culture, the enslavement of men by corporate greed, and the illusion of free will in modern society. But the deeper you go, the more you realize he isn't trying to fix the system. He wants to burn it to the ground. Tyler Durden embodies existential nihilism, the belief that life is meaningless and the structures we build, governments, jobs, social norms, are lies designed to keep us obedient. But where most people become depressed when faced with meaninglessness, Tyler embraces it. His solution? Destruction as rebirth. If society is a lie, the only way to be truly free is to destroy everything and start over. As the credit card buildings explode, Tyler achieves his goal. He doesn't want power. He doesn't want control. He wants freedom from all systems. The terrifying question Fight Club leaves us with is he entirely wrong? While the Grinch may seem comical, he actually fits perfectly into the chaotic villain archetype. Unlike other villains who want revenge or power, the Grinch destroys Christmas simply because he hates it. The Grinch is an example of reactive aggression. His hatred for Christmas isn't based on logic, but on deep emotional wounds. He sees people happy, and instead of feeling joy, he feels spite. He wants to ruin Christmas not because it benefits him, but because it hurts others. Unlike Thanos or Light Yagami, who justify their actions with logic, the Grinch doesn't need a reason. He is a villain purely because he wants to be, and that is the true essence of chaos. What makes chaotic villains so terrifying is that they don't play by the rules. They don't follow logic. You can't reason with them, bargain with them, or predict them. They expose an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes destruction doesn't need a reason. And that leads us to one final chilling question. If everything you believed in was a lie, would you destroy it too? Some villains wield brute force, others spread chaos. But the most dangerous of them all? The ones who don't need to lift a finger, the ones who make you destroy yourself. Manipulative villains don't fight with strength or destruction. Instead, they use words, deception, and influence to control others like chess pieces. These villains pull strings from the shadows, orchestrating grand schemes where the victims often never realize they were pawns in a much larger game. let's take a deep dive into the manipulative villain and why they remain some of the most chilling characters in fiction. Gustavo "Gus" Fring from Breaking Bad is one of the most calculated and patient villains ever written. Unlike most crime lords who rule with fear and violence, Gus presents himself as a respectable businessman. He owns fast food chains, donates to charity, and acts as a model citizen. But behind closed doors, he is a ruthless puppeteer, using charm and professionalism as a mask for cold, calculated ruthlessness.
I hide in plain sight, same as you.
Gus embodies high-functioning psychopathy. Unlike impulsive criminals, he is calm, strategic, and never acts out of emotion. He plans years ahead, playing a long game where his enemies never see him coming. What makes Gus so terrifying? He doesn't need to threaten his enemies, he makes them feel safe. By the time they realize the danger, it's already too late. The scariest villains aren't the ones who kill without thinking. They are the ones who make you trust them first.
I love rumors. Facts can be so misleading. Were rumors true or false are often revealing.
Hans Landa from Inglourious Basterds is a master manipulator, a man who doesn't just enforce the law, he plays mind games to break people long before he harms them. Landa is a textbook example of Machiavellianism, a personality trait where individuals use cunning, deceit, and emotional manipulation to maintain power. He enjoys the thrill of control, knowing he can make anyone confess their secrets without force. Unlike other villains who intimidate through violence, Landa manipulates through conversation. He makes his victims feel comfortable, slowly drawing out their fears and weaknesses. Landa doesn't fight, he doesn't chase. He bends the reality to his advantage, ensuring that no matter what happens, he wins.
What will your mother think?
What am I gonna do?
Run away, Simba. Run. Run away and never return.
Scar from The Lion King is one of the most classic manipulators in fiction. Unlike his brother Mufasa, who rules with strength and wisdom, Scar rules through deception and fear. He doesn't challenge Mufasa in battle. Instead, he uses words to orchestrate his downfall, convincing Simba that he is responsible for his father's death. Scar's tactics align with gaslighting, a manipulation technique where the manipulator twists reality to make their victims doubt their own sanity and decisions. Scar's brilliance isn't just in what he does, but in how he does it. He uses guilt to control Simba, plays the victim to gain sympathy, exploits fear to weaken opposition. Unlike villains who use brute force, Scar's greatest weapon is his words, and that makes him far more dangerous than any warrior. What makes manipulative villains so chilling is that they don't act like villains. They don't charge into battle. They don't wear masks. They don't need weapons. Instead, they make you destroy yourself. Their greatest power? Patience. And their greatest weapon? You. Villains are supposed to be hated. But what about the ones we can't help but love? The ones we cheer for even when they're doing something terrible? Why do we find ourselves rooting for the bad guy? Some villains are terrifying, some are manipulative. But then, there are those who make us laugh, make us feel, and make us question if they're really villains at all. These are the lovable villains, the ones with charisma, wit, or even a hidden heart of gold. They blur the line between good and evil, making us question whether their actions are truly wrong or just misunderstood. Let's dive into what makes these villains so compelling and why we often find ourselves secretly hoping they win.
Your savior is here!
I never wanted the throne! I only ever wanted to be your equal.
Loki is the perfect example of a villain who has captured the hearts of audiences worldwide. He's a liar, a backstabber, and an instigator. And yet, he's also charming, vulnerable, and endlessly entertaining. Loki embodies the trickster archetype, a figure found in mythology who uses deception and cunning to challenge the status quo. Tricksters aren't always evil, they're disruptors. They force heroes to evolve by creating conflict, and in doing so, they become indispensable to the story. But what makes Loki truly lovable is his complexity. He isn't evil for the sake of being evil. He is deeply insecure, always living in the shadow of his brother, Thor. He doesn't seek destruction, he seeks recognition. His journey through the Marvel Cinematic Universe takes him from villain to anti-hero, proving that sometimes even villains deserve redemption. Loki may be a trickster, but his greatest trick? Making us love him. Gru, the villain who became a dad.
Kittens, close your eyes, sleep in peace until you rise. Though while you sleep, we are apart. Your mommy loves you with all her heart.
Gru starts off as a stereotypical supervillain. He has an evil lair, an army of minions, and a master plan to steal the moon. But there's one thing he never counted on: 3 little girls who would completely change his heart. Gru is a perfect example of a redemptive villain. He begins as selfish and scheming, but is gradually transformed by love and responsibility. What makes him lovable isn't just his humor or eccentricity, it's his humanity. We see him struggle, fail, and eventually grow into a father who puts his children before his villainous ambitions. Gru is proof that sometimes the best villains don't need to be defeated, they just need to be loved. Captain Jack Sparrow, the rogue we cheer for.
You are without doubt the worst pirate I've ever heard of. But you have heard of me.
Captain Jack Sparrow is technically a pirate, a thief, and a con artist. But does that make him a villain? Jack is the ultimate lovable rogue. He's selfish, cunning, and always looking for an escape route. And yet, no matter how much he lies, cheats, or steals, we can't help but adore him. Jack embodies the chaotic, neutral archetype. He's neither good nor evil. He's simply out for his own survival. But what makes him stand out is his unpredictability. He helps people, but only if it benefits him. He betrays his friends, but then risks his life to save them. He seems clueless, but always has a plan. Jack Sparrow's charm lies in his unapologetic freedom. He doesn't follow rules, and in a world where we're all expected to behave, he represents the fantasy of living without constraints. Jack may be a scoundrel, but he's our scoundrel, and we wouldn't have him any other way. The reason we love these villains isn't because they're evil, it's because they remind us of ourselves. Loki shows us the struggle of wanting to belong. Gru reminds us that people can change. Jack Sparrow embodies the freedom we all secretly desire. These characters may not be heroes, but they aren't monsters either. They exist in the gray area between good and evil, and in doing so, they become some of the most unforgettable characters in fiction. Which lovable villain do you relate to the most, and what does that say about you? And in the end, they all leave us asking, if I had lived their life, would I have made the same choices? So, tell me, after everything you've seen, after everything you've learned, are you sure you're not a villain?